What's up, Velo lovers? Welcome to another edition of Pack Chatter. We got a really cool guest today I'm going to talk about in just a minute. Before we get started, we'll hit our sponsors. Start first with Legacy Bikes. That's Legacy with an I, Legaci, bikes.com. It's the place you want to hit to get all your balance bike needs for your little one to get them going on two wheels. I've got one for my daughter. She loves it. Hit them up. You get one for yours. Spring's coming. Get the kids outside. Get them out of the video games and get them riding two wheels with Legacy Bikes. We're also sponsored by NYSBRA, the New York State Bicycle Racing Association. NYSBRA is responsible for all the behind-the-scenes works for racing in New York State. Whether you're talking about permits or upgrades, calendars, all kinds of good stuff, grants that are available. So show them some love, follow them on Facebook, or check out everything they've got going on for the 2019 season at nysbra.com. We're also sponsored by the Dirty Bikes Gravel season, and the kickoff is just a little over a month away. So we're starting spring racing here pretty soon. Get signed up for the party. We got a 3-race series. You can sign up for all 3 races by going to Bike Reg and searching Dirty Bikes and getting all 3 races for one low price. Or you can sign up for each race individually, starting with the Ocean Giant featuring the GOAT, Jeremy Powers. Followed by the Prattsburgh Gravel Classic featuring the legend Anthony Clark, and then the championship race of the series, a brand new event, the Hills of High Tour. 3 awesome races on tons of amazing dirt in Western New York. Lots of prizes, parties, live music, the whole deal. So get signed up and make sure you're ready to rock this spring. All right, let's talk a little bit about our guest, David Trimble from Red Hook. It was really great to be able to chat with him about the inside of what he has created, which is just absolutely amazing for those of you that aren't really familiar with it. I met David probably 7 years ago, somewhere in that range. I think it was just before he was putting on the first Milan. He came up to our area and was gracious enough to help me out with some course design on the Old Mount Morris course. For you locals who race that was a Trimble inspired design. He helped me out with a lot of sponsorship stuff and a lot of stuff he didn't need to do, but he took the time to do it, and I've always really been grateful to him for that and kind of followed him and been inspired by the unbelievable things that he's created as he's sort of developed and founded a discipline of racing and managed to grow that all over the world and grow that into just a huge championship series where Red Hook was at its peak at 4 events in 4 different cities. Unfortunately, just a week or so before we did the interview, he announced that they would not be putting on any races in 2019 as they kind of reevaluate their model and figure out how to continue to make that grow. Yet he was still, again, gracious enough to come on and discuss it in a time when I know he's probably a little frustrated and going through some evaluations there. But at the same time, I think everybody kind of needs to remember, and one thing, if you don't know David really well or know who he is, I don't know exactly how old he is, but I think he's about 35. He's got 11 years of epic experience on a massive scale of growing an event from a local fun birthday party to a world-class event. And he's only 35 years old. So wherever he's at right now, whatever he decides to do with Red Hook in the future, or whatever other events he decides to put on the future, he's got a ton of experience and a lot of time ahead of him to put on unbelievable events in the future. And I'm really excited to see where that goes for him because he's truly just a unique and inspirational person in terms of putting on bicycle races. So without any further ado, please check out the man, David August Trimble.
You'll never go out on a training ride and dig that deep.
Awesome. We won gold.
They're life rides.
I'm like, dude, I'm still figuring this out.
Lose sight of the fact that it's whoever goes faster.
This isn't a road race. This isn't a mountain bike race.
The sensei of sprint, Todd Shesky.
My eyes are coming out of my head. Just get in here.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Pack Chatter, the only podcast where the Weekend Warrior and the Pro One coach team up to interview the coolest people in the sport. I'm here with my man Todd Shesky. What's up, buddy?
Well, we're nearing the end of winter, and my track season got cut a little short. But yeah, looking forward to spring, man. How about you?
Me too. I guess when you talk all that trash about how clean the track isn't soft though, is it? That mud's a little
No,
softer, huh?
no, there's not much is soft at 50K an hour. So, so yeah, it's all good until it isn't, you know. So
Right.
uh, it's part of the game, though. It's part of what happens. So essentially, when you can, in essence, walk away and come back to fight another day, it's okay. So. But it's good. So I'm training hard, looking forward to spring though, and I know the athletes are looking forward to some of the gravel stuff you got coming up. That stuff's all around the corner as we are looking at March here coming up in next week.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm freaking out a little bit. I'm at that phase where we're getting close. So, but we got an awesome guest today. Is actually sort of one of the promoters that truly is an inspiration for me and has been for a really long time, and actually helped me start when I put on my first event. It's just a cultural icon. He developed his own discipline. I don't know how many people I can say that about. Welcome, David Trimble from Red Hook. How you doing, David?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Good, man. It's great to talk to you. It's been several years since we spoke last, but we got a lot to cover.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on.
So let's jump in here a little bit and give us just kind of a little background for people who might not know a lot about Red Hook and sort of where it's been over the last 11 years. But as I said, you really developed your own discipline of racing. There was no such thing as fixed gear crits in the format that they exist now before you, and you've had a pretty crazy journey over that time. So can you kind of give us where that started?
Yeah, so Red Hook Crit, I founded it in 2008. At the time, I was racing a lot of alley cats, like urban bike messenger races in New York. And a lot of people in those races used brakeless track bikes. And actually, some of the races, like Monster Track, you were required to race a brakeless track bike. And I was also racing like USA Cycling sanctioned road races, and at some point I decided to organize a race as part of my birthday party, and I came up with the idea of doing a criterium, but like late at night, right before my party, and then using track bikes. And then since then, the race has grew into a championship series with 4 races around the world, continuing in Brooklyn, London, Barcelona, and Milan. And like you said, the fixed gear crits as they are now didn't exist before Red Hook, and now there's hundreds of them all over the world. There's championships. All the countries in Europe have their own championships. They're starting to spring up all over Asia. And yeah, it's its own discipline now.
Did you think when you thought, hey, let's try a crit on fixed gear, did people tell you like that's crazy, you're gonna kill yourselves, and think that it would really take off?
I knew it wasn't like that crazy just from racing alley cats, and I like knew how fast the good alley cat racers could corner on a brakeless track bike. I mean, like we were ripping through the streets and really pushing our bikes hard. So I knew the bikes could handle it and it wouldn't be that crazy. But that being said, it was actually hard getting athletes to race for the first couple of years because like the road racers thought it was too dangerous, and the alley cat racers didn't think it was dangerous enough.
So how does it really kind of differ from you talk about these alley cat races, and kind of how did you differentiate from that in your concept and moving that as a whole discipline forward?
Yeah, so it's not even remotely anything like an alley cat. An alley cat is you have checkpoints, and usually there's no route between the checkpoints. Checkpoints are spread out over a city. The race director says go, and you just race to the checkpoints as fast as you can. The Red Hook Crit was much more similar to a road crit, where you're doing multiple laps around a technical course. So yeah, it was much closer to like a, there was a race in New York City called Grant's Tomb that I would always race at the time, and it was more modeled after that style of circuit than an alley cat.
What other races at that time were you sort of inspired by when you were looking at, I want to kind of develop my own event, or at least maybe after year 2 or 3 when you're like, okay, I got something here that's more than just my birthday party, and you're really putting it together. What other events were you going, they're cool and edgy, and I kind of want to get in that direction?
I was really inspired by all the different urban cycling events, mostly the alley cats. Not so much the way that the sport was designed, but just the way the atmosphere was. And it was a really strong community around those races, and the race directors were super creative. All the races had like really cool names like Monster Track or Cranksgiving or Sledgeman Day, and like there was really nice like artwork for the posters. So just the way that those races were promoted and organized, I was inspired by. Yeah. And at the same time, I was very uninspired by the traditional cycling. It was just, you show up at Central Park at 6 a.m. and race, and you might win the race, but no one cares. And like, it wasn't that vibrant.
Yeah, well, you talk about the art, and that's always something you guys have just done unbelievable stuff with, and something we at our events have always kind of been inspired by, and like try to go a little bit extra for the where we're at least in terms of a much smaller scale, but try to push the envelope a little bit there, because when I first met you, that was one of the things we talked about was how much you loved putting the work into the art, the posters and the merchandise and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that process and sort of what you got out of that personally?
Yeah, so when I started organizing this race, it was as part of my birthday party, and I have a lot of friends that aren't cyclists. They're artists and photographers and writers and just professional, people that live in New York City and aren't involved in cycling, and I wanted the event to be appealing to them. And so having a good party, having the race be have some kind of art element to it, design element to it, was important to attract people outside of cycling. So you're not just doing a really niche sporting event, but you're starting to build something that could be considered a cultural event. So yeah, you're in New York City. You have the world's best designers and critics here, and people really know what they're looking at. So if you're going to design a poster for your bike race, it's going to have to be pretty good.
Yeah.
And I remember. I want to touch on that, the art aspect a little bit. Is I think at one point you mentioned something about you had considered doing something like an architecture tour. And I'd like to hear a little more about what that idea was and why it didn't kind of work as far as at least in the incarnations that you've had of Red Hook so far.
Yeah, I mean, my first idea was to do it because I actually at the time was working for my uncle's architecture firm, and my idea was to actually organize an alley cat that would go to different architectural landmarks throughout the city. Then I realized how much work it was going to be to put that together, and then started thinking about what I could do that would be simpler and more contained, and then I came up with the crit idea.
Right, and because I was just I was intrigued by it because I was like, of course, it has kind of this really kind of cool ring to be able to say, do it, but of course, doing it in any kind of legal manner. Which, if I'm not mistaken, the first couple ones you didn't even have road closures, right?
Yeah, for the first 3 years of the Red Hook Crit, we just did the race. It wasn't illegal, but we weren't asking permission or getting closures. Red Hook at the time was really desolate, and there was no traffic. And we held the race late at night, so we were able to pull it off. And the police would actually come to the race and cheer it on at the time.
So from the beginning, where you're sort of unsanctioned and you're running it this way, and then you grow it to the magnitude, 3 or 4 cities and all over the world, and you did it as an unsanctioned event the entire time. You never did anything with the UCI or anything along those lines. How did you go through that process? How did you get to that scale without going through any sort of traditional means?
Yeah, just because I had really strong ideals on how the sport should be run, and also it's a super simple format. So writing the rules was fairly easy. I mean, every race we had to add more rules and develop the way the race was directed further. But yeah, at any point I didn't see any I wasn't against the idea of working with the sanctioning bodies, but I never saw any benefit to doing so because I knew that I could run the races at a really high level and have really serious rules and make sure the sporting aspect of it was really solid without their help. So I just never found a really strong reason to go in that direction.
Did you get pushback for not going in that direction? Were there people who wanted you to do that?
I mean, initially, I would say like the cycling clubs in New York were like hesitant to let their like club members race, I guess. But other than that, no real pushback. I mean, we've had UCI World Tour pros racing, and UCI doesn't own cycling. You can do races without the UCI, so there wasn't really anybody to give us pushback. I mean, you have people that feel very strongly that all racing should be under this umbrella, and they just won't come to the race. But no one really to give us strong pushback.
Well, and part of that too is you're also initiating a new discipline as well. And so when you look at it from the UCI standpoint, I mean, UCI is just even recently putting criteriums at all. In fact, the Rochester criterium was the first UCI criterium. Most people don't realize, but and I got a lot of phone calls about that, like, how'd you guys get on the UCI calendar? Because they don't do criteriums. And I said, I don't know. I submitted it, and they accepted it. I don't know. That's how I got on it. But you were initiating a whole new thing too. So the UCI wouldn't even really have a place to put you, even if you were to say, well, I really want to go through this, even as I expand internationally. They didn't have a place to put you.
Yeah, there's no rules that exist already for fixed gear crit, or maybe, I know USA Cycling has specific criterium rules, and a lot of the rules I don't agree with, and I don't think they're like good for the show of the race. Like allowing the leaders to lap the field and go back into the pack. I think that makes it extremely confusing for spectators. So I was able to like see what rules I thought were good and which rules I thought were bad for the show, and then come up with my own plan for the sport.
Can you talk the liberty to certainly do that? And there were some criteriums, and I don't know if you I think you said you've lived in a variety of places. I don't know if you've spent any time in kind of central Ohio around the Columbus area, but gosh, I'm thinking now maybe 15, 20 years ago, Tim Tyler put on a series of criteriums, and for a while he wasn't USA Cycling, and he didn't follow the rules of USA Cycling for doing crits, and he had really popular crits for a long time, but kind of doing his own thing, and there's certain things he didn't do. So, some things I like, and some rules I'm like, I really wish that's why the rules there, and I'm really glad that they have it, and people don't do it. But it certainly gives you the liberty to do that, and sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's even good to just, I think, to do what you did and to say, hey, I'm gonna forge my own path here, and I'm doing something that's really differentiated from everything else. And I think that has been part of the appeal even early on. I've been racing track for many years, and people always like, are you going to go down to Red Hook? And I was like, I don't know, it's kind of far, and I never actually wound up doing it. But it wasn't because I thought like you couldn't do it on a fixed gear, because I've ridden fixed gears in the winter, all winter, for many years. With no brakes, and it's like, yeah, it's fine. You just got to know how to ride the bike. So
yeah, well, that's the key part, knowing how to ride the bike.
Yeah, well, it does take some technique, but like I think like Dave said, watching like some of those alley cat races, when you're comfortable on the bike and you know how to take the turns, you can go pretty fast through some pretty tight stuff.
I mean, I think the average speed would be probably even lower if we were doing a road bike crit on the same day as the Red Hook crit. So yeah, they're definitely not being slowed down because of the bike.
Well, and right. Even from the beginning, you've had really, really high level racers that have jumped into this, correct?
Yeah. So since there's kind of this myth that like at some point in the history of the race, all these like fast riders started coming in and ruined it. But actually, like since the very first race, it was really high level athletes competing and winning. It's like actually been incredibly hard to win any of the editions.
Can you talk a little bit about the qualifying for it and how athletes get in or were able to qualify to get in?
Yeah, so that in 2013, the sixth year of the race, that was the first year we did a 4-race championship, and before that we just had one race. We did call-ups kind of based on people's past results and riders we knew were fast, but then all of a sudden it was going to be this global championship, and we had way more entries than we could fit into the main race. So we came up with a qualifying format where there would be different groups of riders, and you would have a certain amount of time to set a fast lap, and then the 100 fastest laps would go into the final. And then in later years, we changed that format to a heat race format, to where everybody would enter a heat race. The top, say, 10 finishers would advance directly to the final, and everyone else would go to a semifinal and then try to advance again. So yeah, it was always it became very hard to even make it into the final because we would have 400 cyclists and only 100 spots into the main event, and we would.
Yeah, I was gonna say when you ran the heats, I mean, are they reduced in length? I mean, how did you select the heats? How was that?
There's always some politics involved in that, but it was actually fairly different every year. So one great thing about not being sanctioned is that I could tweak the rules. I could see what works, what didn't work. In some years I would try to space out all the riders evenly, so I could have 5 fast riders in one heat, 5 fast riders in another heat. And then I think the last year I did it was completely random, where I would just put people wherever it just they randomly ended up. And then the heat races were short. They were about 15 minutes long, but so long enough for the race to develop a little bit, but not too long for the spectators.
Right. How long? So how many heats would it just like you ran one heat race, and if you kind of got in that top number, you were in. So it was a top 20% or whatever from each heat, and that was your final race, or did they have to race more than one heat, or how did you? Was there a repechage round, or how did you operate on with the heat? I'm just really interested because obviously when we have more than 4 fields on the track, we do the same thing, right? And you have these heats.
So so last year it changed. So each heat had 80. There was 4 heats with 80 riders in it, and then the top 20 in each heat would advance directly to the final event, and then everyone else, so positions 21 through 80 in each heat, would race again in what we call another chance race.
Okay.
And then in that race, the top 5 would advance to the final. So you would get the 80 riders going straight to the final, then you'd get 20 more from the another chance races. And then as a bonus, if you won the another chance race, you would get to start the final up near the front.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And that's a little bit.
We actually had a starting grid like MotoGP or Formula One. So based on so if you won your heat, you're on row 1. If you're second on your heat, you're on row 2, and then it went all the way down to 100th place.
Right. Yeah. So kind of. Yeah, and it's similar to a track setup when you have the repechage rounds, and then you can kind of work your way. I've unfortunately had to do that before, where you're trying to scrap your way back into the finals, right? And you wind up racing a lot more because
in 2017, Stefan Schaefer from Germany, he flatted in the heat, and he started in last place in the another chance race and won. Actually, he was second in that because he let his teammate win to get the better starting position. So then he started the final in the back, and then he actually won the final. So, it proved that the format could rescue a top athlete's race in case they had a problem in the heat race.
Yeah, and I think that's key, and especially I think as the race gains in popularity, and have more people to deal with, and somebody doesn't want to say, "Well, I invested kind of made this big investment to get there, and I get something stupid like a flat, or I got caught up in a minor crash, but now I've kind of killed my chance." To be able to kind of say, "Well, yeah, you have to work hard to get there, but you can do it."
Yeah, the last race the last format we had, everyone was guaranteed to race at least twice. So that was really important because a lot of the lower level athletes, they really have no chance to make it to the final, and they're traveling from all over the world to come race, and so you want to make sure that they're getting their money's worth. And we had riders that would race for every year for 5 years and never once make it to the final, but they still had fun and found the value in coming.
Right. And how was it now as you expanded internationally? And when did it was kind of started kind of gradual, right? You got one city added on, and then you added the other two later on. So it's kind of a bit of a progression. But how have the numbers been in those when you would do that expansion? Do you see kind of good numbers in those, or did it kind of take a while for them to take hold in the other cities?
Yeah, every race we added to the calendar became a really big success in its own right. So, yeah, I mean, London, the first year we did the race in London, I think we had the biggest crowd we had ever had at any Red Hook to that point. Every race became fairly successful right out of the bat.
Can you talk a little bit about what that environment's like with the crowd? Because I went, I don't remember what year it would have been. Maybe it might have been the last year you did the old style of qualifying, but we went and watched the qualifying and then came to it that night. And the qualifying was cool. There were a fair amount of people there. It was kind of a different atmosphere. And then when the race actually started, it was unbelievable. I mean, there were so many people there. And so many people that you could tell weren't necessarily really big cycling fans, but were really big fans of what were happening. So can you kind of talk about like that environment in the different cities over the years?
Yeah, I mean, really the most important thing for me is to make the race spectacular and really easy to understand and spectator friendly, and you should be able to show up to this race, not know anything about bike racing, and really like enjoy what you're seeing. So just the whole format, the way the course is designed, and everything is with the goal to make the race very exciting to watch. And I think it's been successful in Brooklyn. I think 90% of the people at the race probably have never been to another bike race before, but they just know that if they go to the Red Hook Crit, they're gonna like see something crazy.
Yeah, I remember that one year we went. There was it was funny how people pick up on the race itself. There was a guy caught between two groups. So you would always pull the lapped riders, of course, but as guys are getting lapped, the field's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And there's one guy who's just sort of caught between a chase group and that lead group, and he's just trying to survive for the rest of the race there. And the crowd is picking up on that and understanding like how hard it is for him to be in that position, and he becomes the favorite of the race. And he was in all black skin suit, no sponsorship, and I don't remember, they were calling him Batman or something. And like every time he would come around, the crowd would go nuts for this dude who's just like trying to survive in the middle of the race. And I thought that was so cool.
They called him the lone wolf, I think. And someone actually wrote this. One of the spectators wrote this long poem about the guy and sent it to me. It was pretty fun. But yeah, those kind of things are really special at the race.
Yeah. It was
I would
awesome.
usually the crowd is a lot more informed about bike racing. They really know what they're watching. They've done their research on the athletes. They know the rules. I would say in Brooklyn, they're less, knowledgeable about the sport of cycling.
But I think that also speaks to when, that story in particular, and I think it points to the winning recipes of races, and it's really spectators being able to identify, right? And now they kind of had this guy they could identify with, I think it's one of the hard things of even American criterium racing is when a criterium comes to town and nobody knows the riders that are there. It's harder to hold their attention, right? It's like me watching baseball. I don't know any of the players, so So I'm very disinterested because I have no investment. I don't know anything. I don't know anybody that's playing. So I think you can start to kind of create some of that when, especially because you kind of have these qualifiers, and somebody that can be just a pretty good bike racer can kind of find his way to the finals and be in there. People could identify and be like, "Hey, this dude's from Brooklyn," or this, he's this guy, or whatever it is, and they find some identification.
Yeah, luckily
And
we
now they're
were
kind of in debt. Now they can get, yeah, go ahead.
luckily we were really blessed with a lot of like super interesting and crazy characters who like picked up on the race and even dedicated their lives to becoming good at it. And these like people, these guys and women from all over the world who are like they're minor celebrities and in this kind of racing, and they had these like these interesting personas about them, and people would really follow them. And then yeah, when you're doing the qualifying races throughout the day, you're building a narrative up until the final. But it's not like a USA cycling race where you'll have 5 different races throughout the day, but they're all completely unrelated. This where like everyone's in the same event working towards the final, so you feel like this tension building all day, which is very interesting.
Well, you guys always do a great job building that up even to the race with your social media and really, getting into ranking the racers and who they are and what countries they're coming from and all of those kind of really important spectator things that I think we lose in a lot of the USA cycling events.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that takes a lot of work, a lot of research. I mean, I'll work for 4 months to do one race. Like just focused on promoting it the best I can. Where most race organizers don't have that luxury. I think that's the race is not as big or doesn't have as much money or it's not as such has such a strong identity of Red Hook. So, yeah, it takes a lot to build that and maintain that.
Yeah, it stands out though. You could see the difference. There's no doubt.
Yeah, so you built kind of this really unique thing, and you were able to replicate it in other cities, which is fantastic. You were able to scale this thing out and say it doesn't have to be just New York, and it's London, Barcelona, and where's the fourth one? It's escaping my mind now.
Milan.
Oh, Milan, yes. So I mean, those are pretty diverse markets. And what were kind of some of the challenges that you had in saying, "Hey, I got this thing going on in Red Hook and an area that you're familiar with. You're from the space. You kind of know it, and all of a sudden, like now you're going international. You're going this thing, and how do you now navigate kind of the local flavor and did you kind of connect with people that were from there? I mean, how did there's one thing to pick out a course.
Yeah.
I mean, look on Google Maps and like, great. Okay, I can go drive around. I even then go find a course, but to kind of replicate what you did to build that story and to have that flavor, how did you replicate that internationally?
Yeah, it was really about building local or like connections with the local community and local relationships with people and kind of learning what the culture is in each different country, because the way you work in Italy is completely different than the way you work in the UK. So being able to like pick up on that and adapt to it quickly. But really, yeah, it's so important to just have a strong local base that can help you. So normally we would like hire a producer in each city who is like the kind of the project manager of that race. And, they would be responsible for helping us navigate the different legal issues in each place and the kind of the understanding the culture of how to work there. But each city was different. Like London,
Yeah.
It took almost 3 years from the time I started trying to make it happen to when we could pull it off.
Yeah, because that's a big undertaking, and just kind of looking at how you kind of created this kind of this cultural kind of thing around the race. So it's not just a race, and being able to replicate that in other areas. That part I guess really kind of captures my interest I guess in that because you are doing more than you're creating an experience there, and to have that experience be successful in really very diverse and dissimilar markets as far as that goes. And I mean, you're slotting into Milan and Barcelona and London. Well, they're quite different cultures. I'm sure that the flavor of London is not Milan, right?
Yeah,
And
luckily our reputation like brought a lot of people out to see it, and then because the race of the championship, where you get points at each event, most of the racers would go to all the races, or at least most of the races. So we were having the same group of athletes in each city. So that part was fairly consistent. And then when you bring several hundred athletes who are super excited into a city to do this race, the energy just starts like building throughout the city, and then that brings people to it. So I think the fact that it was a cohesive championship really helped make the races consistent across the different cities.
yeah, so as you started building, when did the idea of the expansion, the international expansion, not like, well, I have this thing in New York. You know what I'll do? I'll do one in Boston. I'll do one in Miami. I'll do one in, but you no, you went international like right away. And how did that develop for you?
I mean, the Milan race started very early in the history of the event, already in the third year. And that was kind of by chance. I made some friends who were a part of the Bicycle Film Festival, and we just kind of drunkenly came up with the idea of bringing the race to Milan one night. And so the first race in Milan was very small, and then several years later, when I was able to finally land a big sponsor, I had this idea to make a global championship like Formula One, like turn it into the Formula One of cycling. And in order to do that, we needed like multiple races in different countries and have athletes from all over the world meeting up in each city. So, Since the vision is to make a global championship, you gotta be all over the world.
Yeah, it's just so I mean, it was just one of those things where I look at it as like, how, because you didn't expand it domestically, and but went to this kind of international model. So I was kind of curious, like, how did that develop? So it was kind of it kind of had a life of its own a little bit. It sounds like it was just like, hey, let's do this really kind of crazy thing, and then it took legs on its own from there.
Yeah, the first race we did in Milan, I really like. Some of the racers from Brooklyn had they're all my friends basically, had decided to they wanted a trip to Italy, so they were going to fly over and race. And I actually thought that it was going to be a race in Italy just between my friends, like no one else, like no one local would show up for it. And then the day of the race, there was like 70 Italians came and raced. So, but I had no idea. I had no idea how it was going to be received at all.
So when you get to the point where now you're 8, 9, 10 years in, and you've got all 4 of these races, and you've grown this monster thing where you're leading a culture, and you have races all over the world, and I can tell you on a very small scale of putting on events, there's lots of ups and downs. Like there's days where like there's just 25 catastrophes, and you're like, why am I doing this? And then there's days where you're like, this is awesome. And I think you kind of have to be addicted to that to want to do it. But to do it where you did it is just mind-blowing. Like, how did you manage that? Did you ever slow down and go, what am I doing? Or were you just kind of moving forward all the time?
Yeah, it's definitely super challenging. Like, one day I want to write a book just about everything that happened behind the scenes, because, it's really a tough, very, very hard event to pull off, especially as it was growing. And every year by the end of it, I would say like the week before Milan's always the last race of the year in October. I'm always like, this is never doing this again. And then Milan was always a big success, and I was like, kind of then had energy again to push it to the next level. Yeah, very, very difficult, and but at the same time, I also got a lot better at organizing the races, and I really didn't know what I was doing for the first 5 or 6 years of the race. I was just kind of winging it. And then as the race got bigger, it really forced me to approach it more professionally. And I hired some really great people to help me. And, but by last year, I don't even go to the racetrack till the morning of the race. Everything's set up for me. And everything's a well-oiled machine. So just being able to figure that process out and making the execution of the races easier as they got bigger was something that was really fulfilling.
Yeah, that process is really kind of addictive, right? I mean, that like, how do I make it better and better and more efficient and more efficient? And people don't really see that. They just they see the end product.
Yeah, they don't necessarily notice all the improvements that you make year to year, but we'll find a better way to order hay bales, and it'll be something I'm super proud of, but no one will ever notice it.
Right.
Yeah, we used to go buy hay bales and go to the farm and pick them up ourselves, and then we realized, they can deliver them, and it was epiphany. Then we're oh, now we're trying to throw them away, and then we realize, the farmer will come back and pick them up again. So
right.
Just every little tiny detail like that, figuring out how to make things run smoother.
Well, and there's always things in your growth too, and when you're early on, you are kind of stuck with I got to go pick them up because you just don't even have the wherewithal, you don't have the budget, you don't have anything to really work with. And when you're saying about the farmer picking them up, it reminds me of when we were doing Rochester, and I called a local town to see if I could borrow sand from their highway department, and they're like, "You want to do what?" And I said, because I was like, "What am I going to do with all these sandbags when I'm done?" Right? I'm going to have 2 tons of sand, and I don't want to get rid of it, so I asked them if I could borrow it and if I brought it back, and they were very perplexed. And I told them what I was doing, and they're like, oh, okay. And I did. And we filled sandbags, and we were done. We took them back and slashed all the sandbags and dumped the sand back on their pile.
That's half of it, right? Is just asking that weird question to somebody. I went up to the airport when we started putting the race on up there and said, hey, can we shut your airport down and do bike races? And the guy's like, what? You want to do a what to the airport? But then it works out, you know what I mean? But you have to ask the question, right?
Yeah, you definitely gotta think a little bit creatively sometimes, because you're like, well, what am I gonna do with this stuff when I'm done? Or what am I gonna do with these hay bales? You're in Brooklyn, right? What am I gonna do with these things? And I don't want to store hay bales all year, So
it took us so many years to figure that out. But just a step-by-step problem solving and making the event run more smoothly was. As there was more pressure from sponsors and financial pressure, I think we got much better at executing the event.
Can you talk a little bit about the team development over the years? Because early on, I don't think you saw it as much as you did sort of later in the way that the races ran. Did it change the dynamics at all? I know it's a lot different. Maybe one of the major differences between a geared sort of traditional race that lasts 90 minutes or 2 hours and a half-hour race where you're running fixed gear, that maybe the teams don't play as big of a role. But did you see an evolution of that in that style of racing?
A little bit. I think the teams, more than anything, it gave people a group of people, other athletes to go to the races with and to get sponsors. There's a lot of sponsorship involved in the race that was focused on supporting these teams coming to the event. And I think that was great. I think that, there's a lot we could only have one bike sponsor, for example. So all these other bike brands could get involved in the race by sponsoring teams. So it really opened up a whole world for people to, come to these races and be paid, or at least have their expenses covered and have their equipment covered. And these brands are getting a lot of exposure out of it. I think that was kind of the main evolution of the teams. And that's not something we drove. It's just something that happened organically with the race. And I think in some cases we started seeing some teams that could work cohesively together, but in most cases, even last year in Brooklyn, you had the specialized team with 6 strong riders and a rider who was racing basically by himself was able to beat them. So the format you don't necessarily have to have a strong team to do well in the race.
Do you think that's more of a kind of a course layout, or is it more of the kind of the qualifying type structure? What do you think is driving that from your?
I think it's because this race is extremely technical to race. You have to be a really good bike handler and super strong. And normally at least in many USA cycling crits, you never see the rider who ends up winning the race. He's completely hidden in the pack, saving his energy. but the Red Hook Crit's more like a cyclocross race where you like the best riders are at the front driving the pace, and it's more strung out. It's super aggressive. So unless you're capable of winning the race, you're probably going to be nowhere near the front. Yeah, so it's hard to get a whole team at the front of a race, because usually like maybe they have one or two good riders and the rest of the riders are like completely cross-eyed in mid-pack and not helping at all.
Right. Yeah, there was one race that's online that I refer riders to at times that want to talk, especially newer riders that want to talk about they want to block, or they want to they got a guy down the road, right? And nobody really, especially you're talking about Cat 4s and things like that, they don't really know what they're doing or how to do it, and they get into some silly stuff. But there was one race with I think it was Colin Strickland who was off the front. It was one that he won there in Brooklyn. Yep. And his teammate just does this beautiful, I don't remember who the teammate was, but it's this beautiful job of just staying second wheel, and every time somebody comes off and he's supposed to pull through, he just kind of doesn't work very hard, and then they of course surge around him, and then he goes back to second wheel, and then it's his turn to pull, and again he doesn't work very hard, so he just sort of disrupts the chase by just staying in that second wheel position, which I thought was just really a nice little small microcosm of how to use that tactically. But outside of that, it didn't seem like there was a ton of those kind of instances.
Yeah, that was Aldo Ilisic, and he was so incredibly strong that he could do that, but it was pretty rare that was possible. And also, the other teams, I think they could have done more. They had almost given up at that point.
Yeah, it was really well executed. It was fun to watch.
Yeah, and certainly when you have those really tight courses, it eliminates the ability to get very many guys, because as we all know, anytime you get a tight course, you got to be near the front, because otherwise you're constantly accelerating all the time to get out of the times you had to slow down long before. The accordion's just killing you back there. So
I have a years-long bet with a friend of mine who races Red Hook, and he's actually a super strong cyclist. And I've told him that if you ever get to the front of the race, even for 2 seconds, I'll give you like $1,000. But no matter how good, you can never even just get to the front. It's so hard to be anywhere up there.
Right. Especially if you're not starting near the front of that grid, which makes those qualifiers super important. I remember seeing I remember even a national championships we did for Masters Nationals where it was going to be really, you knew it was going to be tight, and it was just sort of and I talked about it with my friend Chris Taroni, and he was like, "What do you think?" I go, "I know one thing. I'm getting the whole shot pretty quick, because I'm not going to be more than 10 guys back when we hit all these tight turns." And it was game over for so many guys. They were just gone. 15, 20 minutes in the race, they were dropping out, because how many times are you going to sprint? You just can't. And so it really does take a team factor out of it, because you're too busy worried about yourself. You can't take care of anybody else in that situation. You just got to kind of just get through it. So, I
think that makes the Red Hook Crit a lot more spectator friendly, because it's easier to pick out riders because it's more strung out. It's not such a tight peloton like in road cycling. And also the riders who you are going to see at the end of the race, you see them at the front throughout the whole race as well.
Yeah, well, they're battling to be at the front instead of sort of trying to stay out of the wind. It's almost, so it does make it that much more exciting for sure.
Yeah, it certainly has some unique characteristics, and it's an interesting format, and obviously it seems you've created something that's really cool, and taken off in many forms, that people have kind of taken a springboard off of your idea, and but you were able to have a lot of success up to this point, which kind of brings us up to where we are now. With the latest news of about a week ago for 2019. So kind of where are you now, and where are things?
Yeah, so obviously the news went out that we're not doing races this year, which is a kind of a tough position to be in. Basically, for me, the most important thing is to have this culture around the race where it's where we're bringing people from all around the world to meet up, and everyone kind of can really focus on it. And we had the chance to do just one race this year, just based on the cost of the events and the sponsorship we had lined up. And I had to make the decision to kind of pull the plug on this year and try to look towards the future to where we can do a full championship again. Because I think that's really where the value of this event comes out, is when we're able to do races all throughout the year, and people all over the world are focusing on it.
So what kind of led to that decision?
I think the decision just came from realizing, okay, we can do one race this year, but that's going to take away, the kind of my efforts to understand how to make the race more sustainable, the championship more sustainable in the long run. Because, if we're just on life support for one race, I'm going to come out of that race exhausted. Everyone's going to be frustrated that there's just one race, and that they feel like the thing is going backward, like slowly going backwards. So instead of just going backwards, I was like, let's just take a breather and try to reset it for the future.
So the goal would be to come back with 4 races again. Is that you feel like that's the right number?
I think that's more. I mean, even more would be better. But I would say that the race should be a championship. And for a championship to be interesting, it has to develop throughout the year. You need like the points to accumulate. You need the storyline to emerge. You need, the only way it makes sense for these teams to exist is that if they can get exposure multiple times throughout the year. Eventually, we want to live stream and broadcast a race, and the only way to keep have a big fan base is that if they can watch it throughout the year. So I think the future of this sport is a global championship.
And where was the I guess the shock or the surprise? I mean, it was a surprise to pretty much as I saw the news kind of unfold last week. I was like, wow, because there wasn't any indication that there was any chinks in the armor, if you will. It seemed like everything, this thing's been going on for 10 years. It's been solid. It's popular. There's lots of spectators. There's lots of racers. There's everything. The formula looked pretty locked down. And then just kind of say, well, we're just not able to do it, is a surprise, I think, to a lot of people. And so what kind of precipitated that, and how did that catch you by surprise, if it did?
Yeah, I think for the people really involved in it, it wasn't a huge surprise. We went from 4 races in 2017 to 2 races last year, and really, to some degree, we're a victim of our own success. As the races got bigger, they became just exponentially more expensive and complicated to put on. So, in 2018, we had a similar budget to the year before, where we did 4 races, but the venue costs in Brooklyn doubled. So these costs just kept building on us. So we realized that we have to find bigger partners. We have to find more partners. We have to find a more sustainable business model to keep the championship alive while we're if the race will ever reach its full potential.
Do you see coming back into different venues? Like if you're is there ever a possibility to have venues where you can charge admission for spectators as a form of revenue?
It's possible. I mean, Brooklyn, I think, would work more than anywhere else, but ideally we would keep it free if we can. I think the next step is that we have to become live streams, because we do have fans all over the world, and a lot of the fans can't be at the race and they want to watch it. I think for the bigger sponsors, it's mandatory to have this, global fan base. We might have 15,000 people at the race, and 100,000 people on social media, but really, the big sponsors, they want to see they want to see 1 million people watching your race on TV. So it's chicken and eggs. Like, how can you do that before you have the money? Because you need money to do it. That's kind of the point where we're hung up on now.
Well, you're not alone in that. I think everybody in the sport's hung up on that in some capacity or another.
Yeah, it's tough. It's not like other professional sports that are really developed commercially, like soccer or football or basketball, where there's like, those sports are making money. There's no bike races except for maybe the Tour de France that's making money right now. Not even the races that you probably think. Most of the classics in Europe are supported by the government to huge degrees. So cycling has a long way to go to be a really commercially successful sport. And I think Red Hook Crit has a better chance than almost anything else to get there, but it's going to take a lot of money to get there.
Yeah, I think that's why like Todd said, I think that's why people who maybe were not inside of it like you were kind of shocked, because it did look like that was one of the places where people will go, hey man, it's all working over there. People are showing up to see this. This is exciting. It's got this spectator piece that really, nothing else does. So I think, you're right. It's got the best chance. So hopefully you find the right equation for that.
Yeah, having so many spectators is amazing until the security requirements triple. So, it's double-edged sword.
Yeah, I've always said that about events. When people are, when trying to find venues and people are like, well, I can go to this venue, then I won't have to have police. And I'm like, yeah, there's a reason for that, because there's not going to be people coming to it. It's always that love hate. It's like, yeah, I want lots of people to come, which makes it more expensive and hard to do because we got to get people off the course. And so it's the great problem to have, that you have so many people coming to it, and the eyeballs are good. I mean, you want the eyeballs because that's the sponsors want eyeballs, and so but it certainly looks like you've got a lot going for you on the event. You've got spectators, you've got people that want to race. You've got a lot of momentum. So I'm eager to see where you can get this thing back in 2020, and maybe it's even a little bit of a pivot on your idea. And I'm sure you live and breathe this thing. So anything that Tony and I can sit here and pontificate about is not something you've probably already thought of.
But we'll do it anyway.
Yeah. Every time anyone gives me a good idea, I run with it. So they're always appreciated. But I mean, that's really why we're taking this year off, is to look at everything. Like, what are we doing wrong, or what can we change to make this thing keep growing, but also be sustainable and be attractive to big investments. So.
Well, I think that says a lot about why, your character in terms of how you approach it, and how much you care about the quality of it too. Because a lot of people would just say, well, let's just keep doing it and hammer forward and do the one event, and stepping back and being able to look at it and go, okay, I want this to be at the same standard that I've created, says a lot about what you're doing. And I don't have any doubt you're going to come back with it, or anything else that you decide is interesting for as far as race goes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hopefully we're we're successful in our efforts.
All right, well, we'll let you go. We appreciate having you. We're huge fans, and you've always been a big inspiration for me, and we're a big help for me getting started. So I hope you have a good year off, and you get to take a breather and kind of come back fresh and bring us something even better.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate being on the show.
All right.
Yeah, and Dave, if you as you start to bring that back, and we'd love to have you back, and as you start to get things developed and try to roll this out and get some press, and we'd be thrilled to be part of that process with you.
Right. Yeah, I'll be back with good news.
All right.
Sounds good, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Good night.